Hi, I'm Seamless, and it's Tuesday, which means like the whole month of February I missed a crap ton of viewer track reviews. However, I did actually collect all of the viewer track reviews for the days that would have been submitted to be those days. A couple tracks were resubmitted multiple times, which you should do if you miss one. It's my fault for not doing them, but I kept them all and I collected them. And that's why I'm keeping the numbering convention to be multiple per video, because they were actually picked for the days. Today we have 17 tracks that we're going to go through, and then I'll do it again tomorrow, I guess. All right. Starting up, we have The Before Time by Aeixo. I've seen this name like 7 times, and I'm like, how do I pronounce that? It's a pile of vowels and an X. All right, let's have a go. Alrighty. So this is pretty sweet. I really liked how it had like the mix style, the one track mix style. I talk about this a lot, about how when I was newer, I didn't get that when I was listening to mixes, some of them are mixed well enough that I didn't know when certain songs began or ended. So I ended up writing tracks with an intention of switching things up in between and in the middle, more than you would expect in like a more sort of cohesive like vision of an original item. As a result, they did kind of end up like this, which is just big kind of sketches of things that could potentially be, you know, in a song. And I got nothing against that at all. Like I have no quality statement to make it be like, you should be writing differently. Like I just think it's cool. It is also, I'm noticing this. I see this a lot now. People are following the advice of creating their songs in certain ways, and you can tell when it happens when the intro mixing choices don't seem to add up until you get to like certain parts in the middle where it's like, oh, that's why that's like that. There's nothing wrong with that either, I guess. Is just actually, excuse me. There actually could be some benefit in utilizing that to your advantage to be like, oh, the mix isn't really full until it gets here, and that's why it's the drop. Though, like, the thing I noticed in particular was like this bass is pretty cool. Like the sound design in general in the track and instrument choice is pretty spot on, but we'll talk about that too. These kick joiner moments. This is when the kick and the bass, the mixing of the elements in the track shine through the best. The full D&B in a bit later was also fun, but like this, I could tell that this is the thing that got focused on to make the tones of the things the way they are. And it's really well married together, but that's really the only part of the song that is. The rest of it is only kind of together. And the sort of the looseness with which they're together is a bit about the instrumentation that I was just mentioning. So the sounds is great. Where you put the stuff, like the structure of all this is like descriptively perfect of like what a track is, right? Other than the weird arrangement of the parts or whatever in the different keys. Just it's all this stuff. You have the kicks and snares and basses and leads and vocals, and it's all audible and it hits and the fills feel right, and it like the build-ups are written the way they should be in time the way they should be. It's all great. But part of what feels weird and empty about it is a bit that it's weird and empty. And just as a really basic descriptive fact, like these elements you have that are the things in your track are like the first step of all of them. There could be and should be extra junk kind of just floating around them that we really can only hear or see like in these moments of nothing. Because we like are really full furnished and finished version of one of these feels quote unquote pro because there's a seemingly impossible amount of shit in that. A seemingly just large list of like just layers on layers on layers, but most of them are inaudible or audible in the kind of way that like you're not really aware that you're hearing them, which means to say that I'm not saying that I want you to put more junk in here that we can hear. Like, we're not trying to like be so busy and so full that like that's like what we want that, right? I get that I come from Neuro and it's kind of sounds like what I want, and Neuro is a little bit like that. Neuro is kind of like what is the maximum amount of stuff that can be heard at once that still sounds good. That's not just noise. And in sort of elegant quote unquote pro versions of just straightforwardness like this, it's about the fact that you still kind of just hear this is the point. Like this is all would be there. There would just be like 2% extra worth of stuff that is just a whole bunch of stuff that follows around with these things as a primary element. These are the things that they would, support. Good stuff though. Moving on up, we have Wack by AlBeRtObInSoN. It's all bat, so it's hard to read. There's no R in that they're Albert. Just Obinson. Obinson's kind of neat. Wack. Let's find out. Wack. Let's find out after I note the time. Alrighty. Okay, maybe not necessarily non sequitur, but this really gives me vibes that reminds me of Silent Hill a bit. Not for any reason like visually or aesthetically, but if you're not familiar with that game, the game had real interesting music, and I don't mean like it was scary or crazy like overdone or whatever, but it was just really sick beats. It was just so cool. And that's kind of what this reminded me of, that age of like Linkin Parky, Mr. Hani kind of stuff. And so with the usage of the samples, this is hard. This is a difficult thing to do because the way that stuff was done when it was like new and like quote unquote legit was not by having the tools to do it this well. I have no idea if that's what you're trying to do. If you're just making a beat, like this is a fine beat, totally fine beat. Like, there's a little bit of incoherence when it comes to just like some of these like some things that are happening. But if this is just a beat to have a beat on to like rap over, this would do. This would do great. You'd probably find better, as it tends to happen with stuff like this. If you're the same person that mixes a vocal on top of a beat you made, then you will find new and cooler things to do with the context of a vocal to work around it. It's a lot easier to know when to do something like that. But other than that, though, like there's the sampling thing. The use of these sorts of sounds in music like this originally created during a time when just having like keyboards with sounds that were good enough was really a thing. So that meant that you sampled, like you rip stuff from things that did have these elements. And oftentimes the off-rhythm interpretation of those bits was just having fun with it, a good time, but also sort of only what you could do with it. If you didn't have a whole phrases to work with, then it would be somewhat irresponsible to sort of just like play the only bit you had a lot. So you'd play sort of smaller out of time rhythm, make a new bit out of it, basically. And that's where a lot of the really cool cuts and really cool edits that are in those tracks come from. But if you just have the material to sound like the source without having to do that step, and you don't do that, then in my opinion, it gets a little weird. The sort of unintentional lackadaisical nature of it feeling that way, which was in the style, like coming at it from this direction doesn't make it feel the same. And in my opinion, the way that you would is not that difficult. Is you do what you're doing here, and then instead of just putting the stuff in the track, you would just render this out as a thing and then treat it like it's a sample, like you sampled it. I used to do that for drum loops and stuff. I had the same problem. Like I tried so hard for so long to nail drum tech that when I eventually had the power to do anything, because I had something like Superior Drummer, then the fact that like I didn't have limitations made it harder to do stuff that was born out of limitations. And you end up having to do a little bit of like that perspective stuff just to, if you really want to nail a nailer like it. But there's nothing really wrong with this. Like, stylistically speaking, if you didn't exist in or hear any of that old stuff or like grew up in it, then like how different this sounds is not really a problem. I'm mostly describing that just in case any of that happened to be your goal. All right. Up next, we have BTD 710, which I'm pretty sure was submitted. I might be mixing in some lesson tracks in here. That'd be kind of bad. Let's have a look at this though. After I notate the time. And then it just ends. Not as though things like this, I mean, no, that should be an ending. This is fade out, come on. So just you end the same way you began with this stuff. It's more or less the path. This is another example of a thing that is exactly the perfect description of what the thing is, but is missing the last 10% of that like extra stuff in the background. Just like every new bar needs to have like one, maybe not bar, but like maybe every new like 8 bars, like a new element that is so light and inconsequential that it doesn't threaten anything that you're doing here, but it is considered in feeling of an extra layer. That helps. Like, I don't know if this is called BTD because it's in any way inspired by BT's music, but that's definitely how that stuff was done. Billions of layers and microtonal adjustments. Yeah. So structurally and like, all right. The only actual beef I have with this track is the way that the snares fit. The mix of it, it's a fairly dynamic experience. Like there's lots of room in here, so how far apart stuff is like not too surprising. If this is a pre-master, then this might actually be fine. The way that it is, because then when it comes like the all the power around it. Although if this is a pre-master, then this sub is not fine the way that it is. And here's why. Because right now this felt pretty fine, right? In fact, I didn't even notice that was a problem until I noted that. Wait a minute, this looks kind of not mastered. And the reason why it's an issue is because we can actually see the problem. The problem is there's little dots and stuff inside these two harmonics being here. That is a representation of action, like phase cancellation between a thing that becomes really, really loud when you compress a thing. Like those differences aren't so audible or even noticeable or even a problem because they're low amplitude. The difference between them and the main element isn't that much, but if you magnify it, the differences relatively are the same, but they're bigger now. And they start to have an impact on your mix. And like all of this little incongruity starts to crop up as being like a level problem. And that's why that kind of thing tends to be a bit of an issue. But this is a little too careful for that. Like on the other hand, I have seen plenty of trance tracks that don't really have super cohesive low ends, and they exist that way because the uncohesion is the point. And if that's your goal, then yay, you're gonna live that life when you master this. But if you want to avoid it, this is basically the entire reason behind separate subs. On the other hand, on the like third or fourth hand, how many hands? The point is there's a lot of directions that go with this, and it mostly depends on your kind of way forward with it. But there's a little hot area in the snare. It's kind of bugging me, and I just kind of like that like scoopy. So like normally when I look at snares, I think of it as a 4-part thing. There's a fundamental, there's a ring, there's the clap, and then there's the paper. Paper could be where the level it is. The clap is a bit hot. There's obviously not a fundamental or a ring in this example, but it is still 2 parts of a whole. I don't know. The unmastered nature of it kind of throws some questions on how some of these level choices are. But if this is your vision for how this should feel balance-wise, then it's a good one. Like you definitely understand at least how it should come out, which is good. After this, we have Elijah Mergold with Horde. Is this a World of Warcraft reference? Let's find out. At the eye, note the time, and make sure we're at the beginning. Cool. This sounded familiar. All right. This actually reminded, I mean, for lots of reasons, it reminds me of lots of stuff I did, but this actually has one half of the problem that we've been discussing of the previous tracks, this idea of like not having enough stuff. This has enough stuff. This has the other problem, though, of that everything in it is as audible as everything else in it, which you might think is the desire. And you also might think that a lot of the suggestions and warnings that like engineering advisors have been giving for decades has to do with an understanding that like we'd want everything to be audible, but we just don't have the power. And that if we could actually functionally create a mix that's like that, that would actually be the better thing. And how many times have we gotten this far and started to realize that like it's not really a lack of technique in making the things married together at maximum level that's the problem. It's the idea that we're trying to make the maximum level that's the problem. So studies for this, right? Let's see about what we're comparing ourselves to. When I was principally doing stuff like this, my big comparison was Spore's remix of The Chemists. I actually forget the name of the song that I'm thinking of, which is insane because it was like a guiding star for me for like 5 years. But it's a task, and the task is because it's a remix, so it has a kind of like way of it being, and then like the basses come and the basses like do with it. And the thing about that kind of, the reason why that stuff works is because the sound design is so unbelievably killer that you can just hear it as a thing out in space, and it sounds awesome. This was Spore stuff we're talking about, so that's what we're, the sound design is on point here. It's the sound. The sounds are fine. That's not the problem. The problem with this specific area, you can even kind of see it just from the relationship of the elements, how stark and on top and contrasted out of everything these things are versus like kind of there's no lead in on the hits. There's no kind of effects, different effects per element. Like Kill the Noise. Remember original Kill the Noise intros? Like again, similarly, like the sound design was being showed off, but it also was being played with in ways that you wouldn't even necessarily hear actually in the track later. It was just actually only what you did in the intro because you had an intro to do it. Other than that, so like I did a lot of this. I did this in like the Warrior sound and a couple of older tracks too. I also did a lot of the main problem that this track exhibits, which is trying to make everything exist at the same loudness. But these sorts of big elements have more problems than just their power, which is that if you leave a big wash like this long enough, you're training people to feel the way, and then when you break it up with a particular kind of power, it's not like there's a way that could feel right. Is that it is just very hard, because like you see this deficit and how that's there. Like we essentially trained ourselves to detect this, and then when this being the opposite makes us feel like we've had like the wrong mix. As awesome as it feels and sounds. Also this lead that comes in later, way too loud. Most elements are actually way too loud in general. Like I can hear even while this is happening. Like let's just listen to it again for a second. See, I was actually just checking the low mids and highs here, and I'm noting that you're actually doing the correct like mix architecture of all the elements that are in here. And the reason why this isn't just coming out and sounding right is because there's elements out of control now that you just pretty well can't handle inside a mastering element. And it's because of the amplification of amplitude difference that we're talking about in the previous track. The fact that now this is also loud and also together means that it's all colliding in a way that has a rate, and that rate like is its own thing and its own problem, but it can be solved by like just coalescing sound design in a way that doesn't move as much when it's like conflicting, things like unison and whatnot. But well, there goes my thought. What the heck was I just talking about? Woo! Wait till amplitude difference. Okay, so the idea is that the differences before they got compressed were not a big deal, but then when they got compressed, like how far up and down things move and how fast that happens starts to create extra content, and that comes across as mud. And the louder stuff is altogether, the harder that effect comes, and it is not something that can be EQ'd away. It isn't something that can be compressed away. It's not something that exists in the system. It's actually in the air. The math of it is a thing that occurs in our heads, in our ears, and accounting for it is mostly just making sure that the conflict, if there is some, is tuned to whatever the elements are conflicting, and that their maximum loud, like in the like I mentioned the Spore example, in those examples, there's honestly almost as much stuff. It's just that everything is just really quiet. And like this track also has those elements where it focuses really hard on like the bass moments in the drum and bass sections. But that like those air elements that are absolutely in these tracks, and other Spore tracks were my study for doing things like blending a lead into stuff. Because there's I wish I remember the names of these songs, but the point is that you would hear these elements in there, but if you were to like look at the analysis of how loud they were barely there. They imparted their like, impact on the mix, but of course the things that should have impact are limited. There's really only a few of them that literally have the like legit call to have impact. Everything else needs to be less than that. Is all. Structurally, melodically, sound design, and impact-wise, this track was great. Holy crap. Keep doing it. It's awesome. Moving on, next we have Error 81 with Bronken. Everyone's got a song named Broken. I've got a song named Broken. It's from before I was seamless, but I have one. All right. Checking the time. Well, that kicked ass. This is a wonderful example of when the detail is there and mixed for it. And again, from the visual perspective, we can sort of see the result, which is that there isn't really negative space. There's gaps and there's depth, but the negative space is something that the artist created. And that's something that's what you want to do. You want to make your negative space. And stuff like this can exist. This crazy high frequency thing that's really low level and relative to everything else is something that can like be there at that level because it's so high frequency. And same elements with the other stuff behind all these things here. So like on top of the main vocal, there's some other vocal, there's a chord kind of going on, and then now here's a new lead. Do you hear how loud they are relative to everything else? Which is to say, practically imperceptible. There's the big kick, big bass, there's barely a tap, and then there's the elements that are kind of present, and then everything else is less than that. Obviously, this isn't driven with the power of a track, like a drum and bass track or whatever, but like this relationship is what you want. You just want it to be sitting higher. And this is the result that you get. It feels crazier, more professional, doesn't it? It could have more going on, but I mean, that's always true, but it still sounds right for the amount that it has. It doesn't sound like, oh, this is a neat sketch that like could have had more filled out or whatever. This is like, yes, this is filled. This is what this is. It's nice. I don't really have a lot more to say about it. It's honestly quite a well laid out thing. The sound of bookends. All right. Coming up next, we have Somewhere Happier by Etobio. Let's see what you are like. This track takes the negative space concept like all the hell the way, and it worked out for having done that. So element-wise, we know that this is a different genre and that it's chill and it's minimal in comparison to sort of the louder, epicer stuff that we started with in this episode. Let's compare it, though, directly to the first track of today, the Aeixo track. Why was that track a problem, and why isn't this one? When we listen to this and we can feel it, you probably already get it, but like visually speaking, we also have a very interesting, like we're looking at the layout of what we want with power. The hotter a genre goes, the brighter the top end gets, like in terms of where the power goes. There's 0 dB, there's only so much power. This track is as peak loud, not as peak average loud as one of those tracks, but when you run out of room to go up in terms of amplitude, because this is a power, right? It's up. You could think of it as like a z-axis coming towards the screen, moving up. If you don't have enough more room to go up, you have more room to go to the sides, which in this case is higher or lower frequency. Higher frequency, more power. But so with low energy tracks, you don't need to go, get as bright, but the content expectation thing is still a thing. And this track handles it in a particularly brilliant way. On top of there being things, like there's still like the whole no negative space deal, but it's actually low enough that I don't know about you guys. I mean, I'm listening kind of low, but I could not hear whatever this is. And I was trying at the end there. That's why I listened to it for so long. But like that's doing it. That's the negative space stuff right there. On top of that, there's also the off rhythmness of the main drum beat. This is kind of great because if we were to look at a grid here, and if these were all fitted on the grid, that would be a kind of detail. But because they're off the grid, it actually makes it more detail, even though it's the same number of notes. Even if all of this were gridded and quantized, this version of it is more detailed than not doing that, because we know where the grid is. Our brains know where the beat and the pulse is, so it being off the pulse makes us think a little harder for a second. And that's essentially an extra detail. The fact that it's not on the grid is an extra detail. And this is something I really want to point out, that detail doesn't just have to be about more content, like just a different thing. Because in those hotter genres where this would just be full of the bass being the whole spectrum as loud and all the way up, how do you make enough differences? How do you make enough things that are different if harmonically there's just not room for them? Because same deal, there's not enough power to go up, you go this way. There's not enough power to go this way. Where do you go? Well, if you continue on the axis methodology, we'd go this way. And that's what rhythm is. When you put a different thing at a different time in a different way, that's a difference. It exists. Yeah. In fact, a lot of the coolest, like modern bass sound design is actually kind of rhythmic. It's about a collection of snappy things that come together on top of what bass element, and the timing of that snappiness around with the roundness of the hit makes it feel a way. And it's because the distance of the snap is a tone. It's an amount of hertz that extrapolate, and it makes it. The whole point I'm making is that like you can utilize more than just tone and level to differentiate, or even notes. You can use more than all of that to figure out how to make something be different for something. You can also use rhythm, and it'll have the effect. It'll do it. And that's something. I like this track. It's a wonderful example of that in progress. Well, in process. I have no idea how in progress this is. This sounds finished to me. Like, I'd take it. It's not even that loud, but like, who cares? Stuff is all being auto-normalized across the board, and everyone, wildly privileged thing to say out loud, but stereo technology and available listening devices are getting good enough in certain degrees that I wonder if we're going to have to care so much about like mixing and mastering in the future. Like, what if people actually get good enough at dealing with it on their own that we don't? Well, coming up after this, we have Come and Take by Fyrebrand. And I'm got hiccups or something? That's weird. Okay. Checking the time, making sure I'm at the start. that was just perfect. Like, wow, this is such an encased, solid vision. Woof. So younger me would actually listen to this and be like, that's not that interesting sound design. But like older me now has the wisdom to know that this actually has some very interesting sound design. Let's listen to the main bit again. Look at these whips. Like, there's the main bass, there's the harmonics that are in them, there's the hi-hats bit, there's kind of a middle element. Like, these are probably not the same thing. Like, they could be. Like, there's ways to do that, and they're getting easier by the day. But the point I'm making is that constructing the rhythm to feel as tight as it did is not easy. Constructing the power of the high frequency to be relative perfect to the bass so that the power is still in the bass, but you could hear it even if you couldn't tell that there was a note there. That's super hard. This whole genre of this specific kind of texture is just not easy. And on top of that, it does all the negative space stuff perfectly. It's exactly the way it needs to be. And it even uses a bit of the temporal math. Like in here, you don't really hear a lot of reverb. But you do out here. It's just the right amount to keep the blur on and the special different. But it's also not creating massive frequency deficits. So the training isn't like getting too far away from the main element for too long. And it just goes. This is just like a massage of a song. I love it. Good job. Coming up next, we have Damage by Hoodoo Blonde. This one looks busy. Let's find out. Ooh, keys. another example of a somewhat high energy full track that is doing the negative space stuff and also the extra layer as well. For example, there's a moment where, yeah, so like this moment. There's a piano, there's a bass, there's some drums, and there's the voice. That's it. But it still feels as busy and full as like one of those sort of big music tracks. And it's because of the fullness of the spectrum and the relationship then, like the rhythm and power around it. Because the main elements in this track are a drum beat that is definitely challenging rhythm a bit. So I'm not saying it's off rhythm. Like, I like the beat. And that difference is enough to make this track feel like the kind of dense and busy that you'd want something to be. Though this track is also a wonderful example of that exact problem I was talking about with noise and mud. And this is compression timing, and it's the perfect example because we can actually see it in unbelievably direct fashion. Like, I'm actually very surprised that this is happening. Let me see if I can. There was one really big moment. Yeah, all right. See the bass here? See how the bass gets darker right here when the voice comes in? See, that kind of happens. See, the bass is actually very solid. This is a very nice bass. This is not an individual sub, but it's also not a square, which is usually how I like to have my series down here. But this denseness works for it. And then this happens. Now, this is happening because this is being all compressed together, and this has kind of a lot of power. So when it comes in, it's pushing the rest of the content down. Whatever, that's compression, that's how it works. But with things like sidechaining, the purpose of doing, like, we want to time these things with the relevant elements, and so that they happen only when they happen and no other time. You might be thinking, well, all right, here's the voice, it's the relevant element, it's happening when it happens, no other time. The voice is on the whole time, though. So that's a bit of a deeper consideration to have to make. But that's not even the main problem. That it's doing it isn't the issue. It's the rate. This backtivity, sure, this activity here, this amount of downness is whatever, but the whole point is how fast this happens. This is from moment to moment forward in time, and fast things are flat and long things have a curve. This thing is fast. And then you can see there's like in between bits, like a little bit dark, a little bit dark. Let's listen to this bit again, see if we can pinpoint precisely the feeling this is. And even right here, we could actually see it happening very fully. Like, the power is too much and it's pushing too much, but it happens rapidly. It's this hoff, hoff, hoff moment. So if this happens fast enough, this is a frequency. Like, you measure how fast this happens per second, and there's your hertz value. Over the air into your head, that frequency will be present in your mix now. Of course, it's probably noisy and it's probably warbly. And to avoid this, it needs to happen either slower or faster. This is a compressor. The thing that controls the fate of this here is the release time. And then all the rest of the time variables, the attack, release time. It depends on, in Maximus and FL, there's attack, release, sustain, and then look ahead delay for just the 3 bands, and then look ahead delay on the master. They are all measured in milliseconds, and they have the capacity to go to 0, which it's distortion. Because if you make a thing, if you compress a thing faster than it oscillates, you'll change its shape. If you compress a thing slower than it oscillates, like, you just kind of get this result. And you want to find the sweet spot. And oftentimes there isn't one. Oftentimes you just have to control it in real time. And that's a little bit where, like, these days, I'm usually automating some element of my compressor timing. Either to follow things like kicks and snares so that the elements of how they interact with things are very tailored to their experience, or for stuff like this, where it's very clear that it needs to kind of come together. So this is how you fix these things. Because the problem isn't so much even that this is a way or that it's compressed or whatever, but that it impacted other elements. And you want it to not do that. And the way you have it do that is have it not impact stuff at a frequency that can impact those elements. Being low frequency and low bass, that's what that is. And so if you increase your time variable so that the effect is faster, which you can if it's focused on a higher frequency content like this. The other way you could deal with this is to not have so much power in your vocals. If you look at the vocal, most of the power exists in the fundamental tones. And in my opinion, male vocals don't really need them so much. Female vocals can utilize them because they're high enough frequency that they're about as usable, wow, as a lead is. And they're high enough frequency that the power isn't that big a deal. But this stuff tends to do this stuff. especially when you have layers, because then not only is one of them doing whatever they're doing that's doing it, but then there's phase cancellation. And especially with like moving and pitch and things, which you should do because it's fun, that's is going to create that result just on hand. So it is just, people hear the term over compression a lot, and that has little to do with the idea of like how hard you're actually pushing it, how hard the threshold is, how much loud you're going in. It's really to do with how fast stuff is. So that this particular, like this is over compressed because this is affecting stuff it doesn't need to. That's the sort of definition of that there. But yeah, other than that particularness, this was a very excellent example of a track done well. Coming up next, we have Headrush by Mersi, spelled with an S. Wow, that's bright. Okay, let's see how loud this is. Woo! I'm ready. And then it just ends. Okay. Well, for something like this, that's actually probably fine. In fact, that'd be an excellent thing to mix another track into. DJs would love you. This is great. Wow. I like actually some of this I would love to hear in video games. The main bit would be too much for actual like level music, but like this element. I feel like that's just in the Crisis soundtrack, you know? Like this is awesome. So this is also a wonderful visual example of dynamic range in the modern world. Because look at this waveform, right? Wow. Sausage, right? And this element here is actually showing us that the way dynamic range is spectral. You can have consistent sausaging on elements everywhere, but we hear this. We hear these like depths, and it makes the power feel so much that more powerful. Like imagine you were on a world of skyscrapers, but like there was a road on like the 30th floor, like, and you're on the 31st floor. So it really just seems like you're on the first floor. Like it doesn't even seem like everything's all that tall. You have to be able to like see how far away the stuff is for you to know how big that they are. And that's dynamic range. Wow, our building's dynamic range. Which cities have sausages for skylines? Yeah, send this to Vision yes, Vision Radio. That's right, they rebranded. Send this to them immediately. Oh wow, it sounds like only the things I hear on there. Coming up next, we have Green by N.A.T. Nagini I have lessons with this guy, and I've never figured out how to actually like. It's N.A.T. and Nagini, and then an I. I think it's an I. It might be an L. What is your actual artist name? See, I exist mostly as sound, so words are hard. All right, let's have a go. And note time. Yay. almost didn't unmute the mic. Okay, this was great. There's only literally only one problem, and it is the quality of the expressed bunch of stuff in here. It just doesn't have the kind of high frequency tinge it needs to survive against that. This is what this is. You hear how this guy is kind of still going on in there, but we don't hear on top of everything all the time. That's the way that a lot of that detail should be when we're doing this kind of thing. This is just a really good mix. Like if this were all I heard of this track, this is all I would need to hear to be all like, yeah, good. But like the last 2%, I would either add a kind of like noisier layer on top of these, like literally just the same version of these two sounds, but like with more unison, or just distorted or something, or just a noise layer, something to brighten them up, because you can kind of hear them. It's the only aesthetic that doesn't totally completely match up, because everything else does. This is a really excellent, like, coming through with this. I will say that there could be some more variation. The first time through, after this comes in again, like, there could be more things happening to it. And also I get that, like, you know, it's the genre or whatever, but there could also be fills in your drums. I like fills, I like breakbeat, I like breaking beats. That's fine. That's not, it doesn't have to be you if that's not your deal, but damn, good job. Coming up next, we have Make It by NOmki. Let's see what you're like after I note the time. You guys remember when Sail was new? I remember when Sail was new. This is great. This is one of those examples where the mix didn't totally coalesce for me until the drop happened. And it's not as though I am not familiar with the dubstep, but I think the reason why this works so well. But to me, this kind of, honestly, it comes down to this. I have like a weird, I don't know, this kind of lead type. I'm just not a big fan of square-based sort of leady experiences. Sounds carnival-y to me, but it is in here. But like, I brought up Sail, and a lot of that stuff was that stuff back then, and it tended to work, but they didn't focus on it so much. They also had vocals and stuff, so I meant the intros and breakdowns just full of one-shots or whatever. But you tended not to see them represented so cleanly and clearly like this. I mean, if you did, I mean, I didn't listen to it a lot, so maybe that I'm just not too familiar with how things should sound. But this mix is pretty well perfect. If you had released this alongside that stuff when it was new, you'd be one of them. You'd be that. I'm aware that like that's not as impressive as saying like, yeah, we're in the future and we know these things, but like, congratulations, you did it. You got there. It happened. You can say you can do that. You did. That's gotta feel good. Coming up next, we have Reborn by Nurbaki Vural with a V. Let's see what this is like after I notate the time. and it kicked. Okay, so this was a wonderful little blend, you know, just to see deadmau5y carbureted Britty experience. Wow, the mixing, it's not necessarily bad, it's just problematic. Like, let's listen. So this element, like all the musical presence and focus on what this is just great. And one thing I really like about it is that it is all those things I said, but not quite. And it's not even about trying to hit a target as it is, I like that it's different. I don't know if you were necessarily attempting synthwave as a thing, but synthwave is mostly characterized by a very tight group of sound. It's like, that's a period piecing essentially. But yeah, one of the reasons why I like certain things is when they do what other stuff did, but didn't just like do it again, but maybe better or a little bit like improved, but actually found somewhere new to go with it. Somewhere that technically satisfied the constraints of what the thing is, but in a way that people did not expect. And things like this are how we get there, where we do the thing that it is, but there's just some percentage of change to it that makes it like lean in a new way. And I like that about this. The thing that gets me though is exactly how the smoosh smooshes once all the stuff is on. There's an expectation for rigidity that is created by this intro because of that short kick, and there not being a lot of like long things. There's a big drone, and it is kind of powerful for a drone, but like there's very short, snappy stuff, and then when it and what kills me is that this kick has less punch than this kick. This kick has more snap. This kick has more transient presence, but it does not have the punch. And is there a difference, you might imagine? And yeah, the difference is actually how long the snap is. In my time trying to make things snappier and snappier, kind of like you try to push forward towards loudness, imagine that there is not a ceiling, or that you yourself are not going to find it. That you could just flex and express as hard as you can, and you're just not going to get to the end. Until one day you do. One day you do it for so long, so hard that you do actually discover that, oh, there's actually a reasonable end to this. And snap is one of those things where you would think that the shape to make the snap, the snappiest, most snapness would be to make the thinnest, sharpest, hardest possible, farthest, like spire of spike snap. And that, as it turns out, isn't the thing that makes like the chunky, super heavy, like Madian style kick experience happen. That happens because of girth, and much like that word implies, it's a width thing. It has to do with essentially, instead of making the kick experience this like incredibly like that, what I said, very sharpness, like you do mostly the same exact what you did, only you leave this little bit, and then the chunk shows up. And what the chunk is that it ends up being enough time in your snap for there to be some amount of oscillation. Ideally, not enough for it to be a tone, but enough that there's an expression of like texture versus the snappiest, smoopiest, snippest that just has enough, just has a that going on. Not even a that, like that's actually girthier than that. Yeah. So that's where I would try it, like to try to get this dude to feel a little bit more like this dude, or I would just have made this dude out of this dude so that when this came around, this is what we expected. Either way. That really is the only problem I have. Like, after a while, this starts to kind of feel nice. Like, there's other sort of mixing issues, which is that, like, your sub is so incoherent that, like, the difference between each hit is basically a different mix every time. And that's one of the big reasons we talk about separating subs all the time. And even though, like, synthwave was a period piece and we didn't necessarily have the power to be as surgical as we were, like now, they still did it. Like early drum and bass did it too. They would just have another instrument that was the bass and not part of a higher frequency experience explicitly so that it wouldn't be devastated. And it would be less devastated than this, that's for sure. And like how piecemeal the kick is with it too. Like this, I'm surprised that this isn't having more problems, which is to say that you probably have the technical capacity to do this or better. Just that like, because you are living with a higher quality of problem and you've solved them. Like your way through of making this into something like doable, despite all that stuff happening, means that you've exercised some like control over this track. I'm here to tell you that life is not supposed to be that hard. But otherwise, you did do it good. This is the world needs more of this stuff, so keep it up. Coming on up next, we have Reckless from OUTCRY. Let's see what this is like. Oh, excuse me. I almost just started talking over that. Have you ever wondered why bells work so well in stuff like this? We hear AU5 do them all the time, right? And people who are wildly infatuated with his style, which they should be because it's rad, then do them too. And why do they work so well? Well, it's because the same reason why a person whistles way louder than they can yell. A finer, cleaner tone that's less, like, got less harmonic stuff going on can travel farther louder, I think, is a way forward with that logic. But the point is that bells don't have a whole lot of stuff going on, and the things they do are very fine and clean, very unaffected. And look how quiet this is, but look how hard and how well you could hear it. Oops. Not at all. Ah! It's super important to point that out because the purpose of noting that that's true is also noting that, like, this track had the fire. Everything is, all the main elements that are burning at exactly, I can hear the tinge on this as loud as I can hear the sub on here. And normally you'd be hearing me telling you that's a bad idea, don't be this top heavy, but this is actually it done right. This track, A, it doesn't clip, which good. B, the value of this is that any level that I can hear any of the content, I can hear all of it, and I can hear the bass. So that means that like if it's top heavy, I can just turn it down and I can still feel it. That's kind of great. That still being the case, there's still so much background content. There's still so many things in the negative space that make this track feel full and good. So this is an example of a track that can go so far, but you can still have elements in there if you put them so far away. That's really the takeaway of this entire video, is the way forward to making like finished sort of produced tracks is this idea of detail that's behind stuff. Like there is a delay of that in there, or there's another line completely. That's how quietly that crap is in there behind this, and it needs to be. We heard it. It happened. It had an impact, and it increased the action of the track, but it did basically nothing to the level, and that's important because that being the case allowed this stuff to be the way it is, as the degree that it is. You really don't want these things to be shining as brightly, because then you gotta try and mix that stuff, and that's not great. Otherwise, excellent work. Pretty much as always. Coming up next, we have Mausoleum by SixSided. Let's see what this sounds like. Really? That was so much. That was so much. Was this on purpose? Like, I've talked before about how I'm not a big fan of water effects used like this as Foley, and it's just a bias. It has nothing to do with any kind of concern for quality or mixing or anything. It just and like, what? I mean, it gives us some cool visual, like imagery. Like, it kind of sounds like we're listening to like people marching in the trenches of World War I a little. And I understand like the stylistic implications, and the music is wonderful. This mix is awesome. Like, that sounds like HBO level like scoring for TV shows, which gets the kind of budgets movies do. So that's something. Like, that's actually incredibly good. This whole part, my favorite part. And it's got all that lovely background elements that we're talking about, and then levels, and it's just such a good example. And like, this is too. This is actually like probably the most example of this, like utilizing the water effects to do the job of like being the detail. Oh God, there's a space in my head that's being moved by this. It doesn't like. It just really is all there is to that. Oh God, I don't know what. I like swimming. I like water. I don't have problems with water. Like hearing water in real life doesn't do me anything. I don't know. Maybe hearing it in this context gets me, but one day I'll figure out why. In the meantime, don't take it too personally that I freak out about water sound effects in songs. Because if I had a face cam on while I was watching this and then this part came on, you just see me make some faces. Coming up next, we have 2330 by Strung. Ooh, that's some sauce. Let's see how. You got a real thing about notes, don't you? Like, damn. Damn. Okay, a whole house, damn, on this one. Wow. I have some complaints about instrument choices, but that's it. And it is largely like a theoretical discussion and not a whole hell of a lot of like actual problems. With exception being like, I gotta wonder if this render is actually correct, because did you mean to have this entirely washed out by reverb in the beginning? Okay. That didn't totally scan for me, and then this happened, and because I was confused about the guitar's level in there until later, where it started to be like, oh, it's working now. So maybe there was like a reverb, like dry wet mix that was just off until it was on the wrong time. Like this kind of felt like it wasn't supposed to be like that. But okay, let's list through the inspirations I can hear in this. We have Dream Theater, Children of Bodom, Godsmack, Mick Gordon, and pretty much all of early 2000s metal. And wow, like it shines so brightly. It's just so good, honestly, and sometimes like I can just hear Petrucci coming in after that, just like rocking it. Like, so though, we gotta talk about instrument choices. Let's, in particular, this piano. I stand alone. There's nothing wrong with the piano. There's nothing wrong with it being like this. If this was your choice, totally cool. It's just not very present, and there's reasons why certain instruments are, and why they were used the way they were. Like, I mentioned Dream Theater and Children of Bodom. Rip Alexi Laiho, but there's a reason why the particular lasery keyboard sound effects they have are almost always the same one, and then the other time they're using bells. And it's because in the time that they were, they formed their style. Those were the things that could cut through these mixes. That was it. That was the only reason. So when you come to these moments, that's actually pretty close to what those leads are like, for real, but it's just a little bit too much on the high frequencies. It's actually just a little bit top heavy. And the reason why it's not is because they want to play those high flying notes without necessarily infringing on the spectrum presence of the guitar. Same thing with piano. Piano in general is too much of a complicated sound to really be communicated through the mess that is a big metal thing. So either they bell it up or they use a rock piano. And weirdly, my study on this and my recommendation for looking at it is anime intros, anime music. Like, they do the piano funk business all the time, and they do a really good job mixing it with stuff. I was just watching Outlaw Star yesterday, and then you give me this. Well, actually, you gave me this weeks ago, didn't you? Point is, this exemplifies so many things. You could be 5 bands. Like, you could. You did a really good... and I also want to point out how excellently you put in the double kick. That's not easy. That is not easy at all. That's like the hardest thing of doing this kind of like crossover experience, is having the power of an electronic track with the writing of a metal track. And this track does everything. If I'd heard this song in like if this was in 2000, we'd have all died. Like, you'd have been declared God and we'd wrapped up Earth. But this is everything I wanted out of what I listened to things like Dream Theater. But like Dream Theater, like I like the newer stuff, but like the older songs I like so much, but they were recorded thousands of years ago relative to me. So that means like they kind of feel away. That's not like my jam. This is the hell out of my jam. It's really good stuff. Extremely excellent use of the instrumentation. The mix is you handled all of the problems. Everything is just a stylistic question. That's really what was left to this. It's like, damn, good job that. Coming up next, we have A Short Fight by Throw Me Away. Let's see just how short. Very nice. This has that energy that I mentioned the anime a minute ago, but this feels very My Hero Academia, doesn't it? In fact, in the lead here, the lead could be that. That's not threatening or anything. But if that were one octave higher in a string section, this would just be My Hero Academia music. And this action here. That's definitely something that I actually pretty much only see in anime. Not even just cartoons, not even just TV shows, but just anime. This musical desire to like really futz with the cuts. And I like that about the genre, about the art there, because they're willing to go farther than you would tend to see in a theatrical production, that's for damn sure. And also for like kind of quote unquote normal cartoon content, like the music tends to be like a little bit more like instrumental and performed. And then there's the anime side where like, oh, what am I thinking of right now? Oh, I'm thinking of Dragon Ball, huh? But the cutting of it and like going all the way down to nothing and like coming in with like the fills, like that right there where I was like, oh yeah, My Hero Academia, like this was the perfect build up, and this was exactly that like fill kind of section, and then the progression and the lead and the beat and the mix is really good. This is actually kind of a hard mix to do. Normally you might hear me talk about how like the kick and the snare don't pop in through too hard, but if you actually listen to My Hero Academia music and music like that in the animes that use it, you'll note that that's actually exactly how they sound. They have kick and snares and they have drums, but it is really just a suggestion. It is not about you being beaten up by the power of the drums. You want to be beaten up by the TV show, whatever's going on in there. So that means there needs to be room. And I mean, but at the same time, we also want to hear the music and whatnot, but that crap is actually now louder than the drums. So we end up like with this response. But you still need to hear the drums. You still need to know that there's a beat. You need to hear them happen when they happen. But if they can't be loud enough to beat you up, but the other stuff has to be, then you have to do all this crap to like make room for them in a way that satisfies all those requirements I just mentioned. And that's a lot of work. And doing it on a beat like this that has lots of snares and middle bits and different iteration of power is just asking for problems. I just tried to say problems and trouble at the same time and said like problems to problems. Like how you pronounce T, like tall. Yeah. What was that? Enterprise? Star Trek? I'm pretty sure. All right. Wow. Actual last track for today. We have Requiem for Insentient World by Xeudo Code. Xeudo, like pseudo, but with an X. That's actually awesome. All right. Start and then 4/4. So wait, does that mean that there's a different time signature just for here? All right, that's one way to do that. Coming up, let's see. Let's get our time. extremely nice. This had a lot of common with the 2330 track. The power distribution is a little weirder, but it also has a less realistic tinge to it, so it tends to survive it a little bit better. Let's listen to this section again, as you see what I'm talking about. So this the Mick Gordoning is hard with this, especially when this shows up. And this this sound though is a lot less like real guitar sounding as it is like a guitar expressed synth. I mean, there's probably guitars in there to make it sound like that, but the point is that it has a lot more of like a synthetically leaning than it is, so that the unrealistic nature of it doesn't hurt it so much. That was something that was dangerous about the 2330 track. Like, he pulled it off nicely, but the problem with going so far into that realistic direction is that you are limiting how much contrast you can have against it, how many unrealistic things can be piled against that before it starts to just break it. This had an extremely beautiful musical expression. Like, I loved it. And really, normally I have nothing to say about that, but I actually have one suggestion about this end here. I have no idea. I mean, whatever. Do new things later, and when you do them, think of this maybe. So this bit. That like alternating like RP thingy. That's when strings do that, unless they're like the thing you're hearing, or when you do a neat ending. I love the way that it came out of the ending. But what I think should have happened is that should have been a much quieter element, and you should have harped on your lead a little more. Like, this should have been a doo-doo-doo, like a string section higher than that, covering this up, and then this fades in for this ending bit. Like, that's literally the only difference I would make about this whole thing, is just to have done that. Because we do hear that lead a lot. It's true. But at this point, like, we've heard a lot of the expression that we do want to hear it again. You actually have made something nice and good and catchy and flows right, that we are not tired of it by the time we get here. So we should hear it at the climax like that. Maybe with a fun reharmonization just to cap it off. I don't know. I like doing that, but I gotta. Other than that, excellently well done. Well done. Like, you guys make such epic music. Oh, wow. Like, I fully just epic stuff and doing it well. The ways y'all are pulling this stuff off are like, they're wildly eclipsing like the professional requirements. All right. Like, just so that anyone, like, we don't have total illusions about how the industries for this stuff works. It has never been about an individual's capacity to actually make something this awesome. It's about how fast you can. It's about how fast you can turn this around and how fast you can respond to notes. And it is a little bit easy to do that when it is way simpler in it. But that's the only reason why you tend not to see like every level of every art like have exactly this, because you would do it, wouldn't you? If someone was like, oh, you want to have this job and make this music for this thing, you'd be like, yes. But if someone was like, can you do it by tomorrow? Then there might be like a kind of consideration there. But as far as actually doing it, this was it. You guys, most of you are it. It's happening. It's honestly beautiful to behold. I love it. All right, that's it for today. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe for stuff, I'm sure, and all of that. And as usual, have a nice day.